we scholars are supposed to be objective, whatever that means. And
Right.
I've read a lot of, philosophy of history and about subjectivity and objectivity. But one of the reasons that at least some readers find this book appealing is that I do have this insider's perspective and that I do have a personal relationship to bookstores in addition to being a historian.
Welcome to Being the Change, the official podcast of James Madison University, brought to you by Madison Magazine. Each episode brings to you stories of how members of the JMU community combine intellect with action to live lives of purpose and meaning. That's Being the Change.
What's up, JMU? Andy Perrine here. Today we're here with a couple, Evan and Amanda Friss, and they have a wonderful story to tell. Evan has just written a book called The Bookshop, A History of the American Bookstore, and it's out just recently on Viking. And it, in its first week, reached number 9 on the New York Times bestseller list. So it was a really big deal for Evan and the university because the citation for the book making the bestseller list said that it was authored by a James Madison University history professor. So we all love to see that. And Evan is joined by his lovely wife, Amanda. And the reason why the couple are here is because they also own a bookshop in Harrisonburg, recently opened on the north side of town, called Parentheses. So this is a very meta kind of conversation because we're talking about a book about bookshops that I bought a copy of the book at that bookshop. It's actually more like a hall of mirrors. It's not really that meta. So anyway, welcome to you both.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Of course.
Us.
So New York Times bestseller, Evan, could you ever have imagined?
No. I had written a couple of university press books before and was excited that anybody read them and that they gained some level of traction, and was really excited that I was able to get an agent for this book and that we were able to have Viking, such an esteemed imprint of Penguin Random House,
Indeed,
publish the book. So I knew it was going to be relatively mainstream for us academics. But no, I never imagined that it would reach this level of popularity. And honestly, it's hard to believe and hard to explain.
Well, and you mentioned, whether or not people read books written by history professors. This is in the class of popular history. Can you explain the difference between what an academic history book and a popular one is?
Sure. So many of us in graduate school, when we're getting our PhDs in history, are trained very classically to do primary source research and also to contribute in some novel way to the field. And that often results in, especially as a graduate student, maybe narrower audiences and narrower topics. And there's also a kind of culture, I think, in academia, and history departments are no different, where we sometimes over-celebrate academic jargon and language.
Right.
And I'm kind of embarrassed now at the kind of stuff that I wrote while in graduate school when I was trying to seem really smart, which is the easiest way to sound really dumb.
I think all of us who write are embarrassed about what we wrote when we were younger.
Yeah. But I've always been interested in speaking to more than just 4 people in some conference room, even though I've done that many times. So this was really a kind of different project for me in that I intended it to be for everyone, but I also wanted it to be a serious work of nonfiction and bear the imprint of somebody who was a serious historian, who was trained in doing primary source research. And I hope the text is easy to read, but for serious scholars, there's thousands of endnotes tucked away in the back for those 4 people who want to see them.
Well, I was gonna say I'm only halfway through it since it's recently out, but it is copiously researched. The amount of detail is so impressive. And you've written a couple books in the past, and those are pretty narrowly focused, bicycling in urban settings.
That's right.
Yeah.
And for all these projects, I love doing the research and going to archives, interviewing people. Since this project spans to the current day, a lot of my characters are still alive, and taking oral history interviews was fascinating and important. So the research and writing go hand in hand for me, and I love both parts. And I'm never going to write a work of history that isn't, in my mind, also deeply researched. I just want that research to kind of wear lightly.
What was the impetus for this book? I kind of know the answer, but our listeners would probably be interested to hear the background.
Yeah, I'm sitting next to her.
The book is dedicated to Amanda, in fact. It's
is.
dedicated to all booksellers, especially Amanda.
That's right.
Right.
And I, of course, as a graduate student in history, read more than my fair share of books, and had become a serious reader, but never really thought much or appreciated what was so significant about bookstores as a kind of institution. And I was in graduate school, and Amanda was my then girlfriend. We lived in Manhattan in the West Village in a 250 square foot, 6th floor walk-up apartment. And I was studying history, and she got a job at the local bookshop, which was called 3 Lives and Company. And it just turned out, luckily, that she was able to find this job there in one of the truly world's greatest bookstores. And it was really through her experience and her talking about what it was like there daily, and me going to just hang out and visit her and see her, that I began to appreciate just what this bookshop, but more generally bookshops, meant for a certain kind of person, which was more than one. It hadn't been me growing up, but there was a whole host of people whose daily or weekly or monthly life revolved around the bookstore. And so it planted the seed as a historian to ask questions about why bookstores evolved into what they look like today, why there weren't more of them still around, what happened, how they changed over time. And I thought it would make for an interesting book, and I was curious, and decided I would write this book someday. And it just took a while for that number of days to elapse.
Well, the chapter on 3 Lives, you can tell, is lovingly written as compared to the rest of the book.
Yeah, it's we scholars are supposed to be objective, whatever that means. And I've read a lot of, philosophy of history and about subjectivity and objectivity. But one of the reasons that at least some readers find this book appealing is that I do have this insider's perspective, and that I do have a personal relationship to bookstores in addition to being a historian.
And how long did you work at 3 Lives, Amanda?
I worked there for 8 years.
Wow. So you were really part of quite the close-knit community.
Yes, I definitely was. It felt like a family to me.
And the East Village kind of feels like a family part of town, too. I mean, the West Village.
It does. Yes, it's a very... Yeah, people think of New York City as this big, overwhelming place, but it's really composed of these small neighborhoods, and, just like our neighborhoods here. Especially
the West Village. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the book is written in a very interesting structure in that you devote individual chapters to bookstores throughout history, but interspersed between each of the chapters are these lovely little slices of bookstore elements, like the aroma of bookstores, or the UPS guy who delivers the boxes. What was behind that concept?
It was actually Amanda's idea.
Wow.
So one of the many things I've always struggled with as a writer is first coming up with topics,
right.
And secondly is structure. And we historians always think about scale. How many years are we going to cover? What kind of geographical scope? At times I thought I would write about a shorter period of time. I thought maybe I'd just write about New York City bookshops. But once I eventually settled on a kind of survey of the bookshop in American history, it became very difficult for me to think of a manageable way of telling that story because I know it couldn't be completely exhaustive, and I had to make curatorial choices. And because I love doing research and getting into the weeds and like telling stories and colorful anecdotes, I really wanted to sort of almost like mini biographies, paint these portraits and tell the evolution of the bookstore, but also have each chapter stand alone as an interesting story. And then there were all these other interesting bits I wanted to include that didn't really neatly fit in. And so I thought of them as kind of interludes, something between the main act to keep the reader's attention. And I thought it could be fun. And they're meant to tie loosely to the chapters that they're sandwiched between. So they have some kind of thematic resonance, but they're also supposed to be playful and kind of diversions.
Well, you say that we have a different kind of relationship with bookshops than we do with our grocery store. And so observing those kinds of elements seems to me to go hand in hand with developing an atmosphere.
Yeah, that's very much what I was trying to do. And I wanted to capture, which is admittedly an impossible thing to do, but capture some of the feel of what it's like to walk into a great bookstore.
Well, I have a copy of the book with me, and I've been reading it, and I find your writing style to be quite humorous, and I know you have a dry sense of humor, and I was wondering if you wouldn't mind reading the last paragraph of the chapter about the Old Corner, which was a bookstore in Boston that became a gathering place for some of the great literary names of American history.
Yes, it was Oliver Wendell Holmes, Longfellow, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and many other writers' favorite place to basically just hang out and read books, talk books, and be with each other.
And it also wound up becoming a publishing house.
Yes, so they were at the forefront of the kind of birth of what we would think of as early American literature. So, which flowered here both by the authors, publishers, and also booksellers. Today, the Old Corner Bookstore has a coveted spot on the Freedom Trail and the National Register of Historic Places. It has an architectural significance, but more so a social one. It was once a literary jewel, a place where some of the greatest authors congregated, and a regular store, the kind we'd recognize today, where books arrived, were put on the shelf, picked up, tasted, bought, read, and discussed. The Old Corner helped launch American literature and the American bookstore. Now, it's a Chipotle.
That's devastatingly funny.
And true.
And true. And the fact that you just stick it on the end there is a good laugh. But I also wanted you to read that because there's something elegiac about the book and each chapter, because in every chapter that I've read so far, there's a birth, flourish, and then eventual demise of each of the bookstores. Or bookshops, I should say, to remain true to the title. It's a little bit dark.
There are certainly dark spots in the history of bookselling, and it's not like any other kind of history, not a completely triumphant tale. Mm-hmm. And many of the stores are gone, including the Old Corner. But people are still reading Nathaniel Hawthorne, and people are still reading Holmes and Longfellow, and many of these authors that may or may not have become mainstream had it not been for this kind of bookstore. And the same could be said for many of the shops that I profile later in the book. So I have chapters on activist political bookstores that were anchors of various civil rights campaigns. And those bookstores, one could argue, were victims of their own success. So they made a real impact, and duration isn't the only indicator of influence.
We'll be right back.
The Metro Dukes Crab Fest is back. Join us October 12th at Fort Hunt Park in Alexandria, Virginia. Included with registration, participants will receive all-you-can-eat food, sodas, and 4 alcoholic drink tickets. Visit jmu.edu/alumni to register by September 30th.
You two have, in an act of hopefulness or defiance, have opened a bookstore on the north side of downtown Harrisonburg, where the revitalization is now reaching a little bit further north, and the bookstore is called Parentheses. When did the store open?
Well, let me just issue a correction. It's not we open parentheses.
I'm sorry.
It's all Amanda's Bookshop. I occasionally work there. I too often make suggestions about the bookshop.
Evan's been very helpful.
But it's all Amanda's shop.
Well, I met you and you were in the store when we were there shopping. So I somehow assumed it was a partnership.
Evan's very helpful. He does work there a fair amount.
And sometimes I'd rather take a shift there than, make dinner or do laundry.
Yeah.
So
Sometimes we switch places.
there's a lot of bartering.
Well, what inspired you, Amanda?
Well, really my experience at Three Lives, which Evan talked about earlier. And there was no store like that here for the people who live in our community. And I felt like I had a little bit of experience having worked at Three Lives, and I felt like I wanted to bring that to Harrisonburg and have people experience as customers what I experienced working at Three Lives.
Well, one of the things that the book really aims at depicting is the reason why people care about bookstores differently than they care about grocery stores or other places is because of the sense of community.
Right.
Are you hoping to build that feeling at Parentheses?
I definitely am, and I think I've succeeded a little bit so far. I mean, I have customers that come in on a regular basis to buy books and to chat, and it's more than just about them buying books, and it's more than just about me selling books. It's about the people and connecting in our community. So that's really what I wanted it to be, and I think it's happening.
Well, and how does an indie bookstore differentiate itself from, say, the Barnes and Noble locally?
I think it's really a question of curation. I mean, Barnes and Noble has a lot more books than Parentheses does. So, and I look through the catalogs, and I'm constantly looking at what's new out there, and I'm making decisions about what to carry in the store, and I think it's about that. I mean, when you go into an independent bookstore, it's really curated by the buyers there, and so different independent bookstores are going to find different things, and you're going to walk in, and hopefully you're going to find something that you weren't expecting to find, whether it's through a recommendation from a bookseller there, or just you happen upon it on the shelf, and I think that's the biggest difference.
Well, that's one of the lovely components of the chapter on Three Lives is that, Evan, you depict customers as coming in with no real idea of what they're looking for and leave with a couple recommendations based on the bookseller in the shop. Have you been able to develop that relationship with some of your customers?
I have.
Yeah.
It's been amazing. Evan can speak to that too. I know he's been in the shop, and I think someone came in recently who was hoping that Evan would be there because he recommended something to this customer previously, and now this customer wanted another Evan recommendation. So, but that's what it's all about. It's about building these relationships with people.
And there's no greater feeling than somebody walking into a bookstore. You are just there, or you happen to be married to the person who owns the shop, and they're asking you, what should I spend hours with? Hours and hours reading, thinking about, entertaining myself with. And you say, here, take this. And they do. And you hope that they like it. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But that's real influence, but it's also just part of being human, of sharing the things that we love and wanting to spread that with others. And it sounds corny in a way, but it's also honestly magical.
Well, and you use the word corny. One of the things that I'm observing, as an older person who pays attention to culture, is that seems to be a real hunger for more authentic experiences. My kids are in their late 20s, and they're sick of technology, and they want in real life experiences. Do you see that happening?
I do, and I think that that's one of the ways that independent bookstores can survive today it's by people realizing that this is a bit of an antidote to the technology, the the pervasive technology that we have today. So.
Yeah, and browsing in person is a fundamentally different experience. People are much more likely, several times more likely, to buy a book that they didn't expect to buy in person compared to online. And we see people all the time who come to the bookshop and spend 15, 20 minutes with their phone in their pocket, just picking up books, browsing, reading little bits and pieces. And they just take a sigh. Sometimes they come to the counter and they're like, this was a 20-minute browse where I was completely in it and feeling these senses and smelling the books and touching the books and their mind percolating. And it's becoming a rarer experience for us all. And it's something to treasure and try and hold on to.
You know, in the book, you distinguish the difference between browsing and book tasting. Describe the difference between browsing and book tasting.
Well, I love that the sort of root, the etymology of browsing dates to, I think it's the 15th century, but various grazers munching on all sorts of vegetation, what they called browsing. And it was actually the old corner bookstore where some of this changing definition of the word took place in the mid-19th century, and it became known as, leisurely poking around in a bookstore and picking up books and tasting them, which Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. Used that expression many times to describe his experience at his favorite bookstore, the Old Corner. He would talk about going in, and he called it tasting, and it soon changed to browsing. But I think it's a kind of sweet concept to think about.
It is. Well, Amanda and Evan Friss, thank you so much for being with us on Being the Change. To our listeners, the next time you're in town, if you don't currently live in Harrisonburg, Parentheses is right across the street from a fabulous diner called Magpie, and it's part of town that is revitalizing. There's a great cider place up there, and go spend some time book tasting. And say hello to Amanda and possibly Evan if she's got him stocking books in the bookshop. Remember, listeners, for you, if you want to have a suggestion delivered to us, send it to beingthechange@jmu.edu. And until next time, go Dukes.
Go Dukes.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Tune in next time to hear another story of how members of the James Madison University community are being the change. Dive deeper and consume countless other stories at jmu.edu/Madison Magazine. Go Dukes!
The Being the Change podcast was conceived by Jim Heffernan, editor of Madison Magazine, and me, Andy Perrine, head of JMU Marketing. Thanks to Jenna Polk and the team at Rose Library Studios, where the show is recorded by Steve Adderton, the guy who also captures those amazing campus drone shots you see on Instagram. Original music and episode production by Neil Perrine. All of us involved in creating Being the Change are JMU alumni, and we bleed purple. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.